We got an awesome ruling by a U.S. federal court. This is a federal trade court specifically dealing with Trump's tariffs.
And to me, it's just like an obviously correct ruling. Even if you love tariffs, you can't do it like this. But now we're hearing about the judicial coup from the kind of far MAGA right about all these judicial activists. The cat turd MAGA account called
he blocked
called them commie judges. There's a new wave of kind of populist nationalism. Stephen Miller agrees far more with Bernie Sanders on economics than he does with Ronald Reagan.
But who would you consider like the intellectual class of MAGA influencer?
I can take their arguments defending him much more seriously. Whereas there's some people like the Benny Johnsons of the world who I would debate, but he's just so unserious. Like Trump could do anything and he would just twist himself in a pretzel to support it. So I understand that struggle. I don't have the incentive to kiss the ring and just defend the thing of the day, because no matter what, like I'm not invited to the influencer briefing. I tried to get in. They won't let me in.
You didn't get the Epstein files binder. We should get into this because this is probably the most sensitive of where our disagreements might lie. Although I don't know, it will be the Medicaid stuff. The Republicans who can't stomach humongous Medicaid cuts, which this is proposing something like $800 billion in cuts.
He and his little buddies have been they've targeted me in the past. And I will just say, oh yeah. They really have a thing for gay people. And I will just say, he's obviously homosexual. There's no, I mean,
how do you know?
Just everything about him screams repressed bottom. I mean, it's not even close.
Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description.
Okay, now everyone can see you, Brad. So first of all, how are you? Happy Thursday.
Yeah, dude. It's only Thursday. What a week.
Well, I think it's a happy Thursday for you because yesterday, and I'm just going to jump right into it, we got an awesome ruling by a U.S. federal court. This is a federal trade court specifically dealing with Trump's tariffs. And so today we brought Brad on to discuss some of the sort of like issues facing Republicans and some of the fissures that we're seeing. I think this is a perfect area to jump into. Brad, why don't you first tell us a little bit about yourself for my audience, and then also what's your take on this opinion?
Yeah, so for folks that don't know, I'm a center-right YouTuber and journalist. Come from kind of a free market, libertarian-ish background, consider myself more of a classical liberal these days, but yeah, I've been pretty outspoken against the Trump tariffs because I am a free market guy and because I think tariffs are bad. But there's two separate questions, right? There's tariffs as like an economic question, as a policy question on the merits. Then there's also the legality of the way that Trump is doing tariffs, because quite notably, like he didn't get Congress to pass a bill enacting tariffs, which Congress has done in years past, and is under the Constitution how it's supposed to work. The Constitution explicitly says Congress shall have the power to levy import taxes and duties and tariffs, not the president. It's under the power to tax, which is a Congress power. But there are some federal statutes that Congress has passed over the years that say, well, the president can impose some tariffs. We're giving him permission to do so in certain contexts and connotations. Trump basically like blew those federal statutes up and stretched them beyond imagination to just put baseline 10% tariffs on everyone and a bunch of other things, all in the names of these national emergencies. And now this was just struck down by this 3-judge panel that you mentioned. And to me, it's just like an obviously correct ruling. Even if you love tariffs, you can't do it like this. But now we're hearing about the judicial coup from the kind of far MAGA right about all these judicial activists. The cat turd MAGA account called
he blocked
called them commie judges.
Has he blocked you
Yeah,
yet?
it's laughable though. Cat turd called them commie judges. And the thing that I just have to say is, of the 3 judges, you have an Obama appointee, you have a Trump appointee, and a Reagan appointee. So today I learned that Trump appoints commie judges. Apparently, this is news to me because in the first Trump term, a lot of the traditional legal conservative types were ecstatic about how many Federalist Society members they got on the bench, but apparently they're actually commie judges if they rule against Trump, even if they're lifelong FedSoc members.
No, it's a great point, and I like how you kind of divided those issues up, because it is conceivable, I don't know how, but that you could have like a policy interest in favor of the specific types of tariffs that Trump levied. But if you believe in the rule of law, and if you read this opinion, it's frankly absurd that we even acted like Trump could do this entire time. As you stated, the tariff power is delegated specifically to Congress, and there's this doctrine called the non-delegation doctrine. It doesn't have a lot of teeth in modern legal jurisprudence because basically courts have worked under the assumption, especially since the New Deal, that the Congress is going to protect and jealously its powers under Article 1, and so really unless there is like no intelligible principle and Congress seems to be purely abdicating its legislative authority, it's not really up for the courts to get into how much is too much and how much is too little. But this is such a case. Now I'm not going to say that the legal reasoning depended wholly on the non-delegation doctrine, but when you have those invocations that where the court is really wrestling, like, well, if Congress really said that the president had unlimited tariff authority, okay, that is an area in which that would be an unconstitutional delegation. It seems like that was guiding some of the court's analysis, which is if the interpretation of Trump had to go, then effectively Congress would be delegating its whole tariff power, especially if you buy some of the reasoning like, well, he's just doing it to pressure the other countries. Well, that pressure rationale could apply to like literally any kind of tariff that you could impose. And that guided their analysis. And if you read it, it's remarkable that we're like reviving the non-delegation doctrine for the kind of stuff. But it's the kind of doctrine that we need at this point because, President Trump is willing to push any limit, any emergency authority that's been delegated. And courts, I'm sorry, I'll let you respond to this, but courts are loath to directly rule that we're not in an emergency situation, like override the president's determination of an emergency. But here, there were many ways for them to find that the plaintiffs were going to succeed, and they found at least a couple.
Yeah, and I get that they like to defer to the executive's declaration of an emergency, but there does have to be a limit to that because, for example, Trump's emergency that he cited for some of these tariffs is just the existence of trade deficits, which we've had for No, I'm not strawmanning. I'm not caricaturing
that's
them.
100%
They literally say the existence of persistent trade deficits is a national emergency, which makes no sense on the policy because trade deficits aren't even bad. But even if you think incorrectly, in my view, that trade deficits are bad for a country, I mean, we've had trade deficits for decades. It's not the kind of pressing, urgent thing that these emergency powers are intended for, where there's not necessarily time to get Congress together and pass a bill. I mean, this is like a 3-decade-long trend. You can't suddenly declare it's an emergency and then move forward with it. And so, I mean, they rested this on, I did something crazy because I covered this on my show my daily show, Brad versus Everyone podcast. I actually read this decision from this 3-judge court. It wasn't very long. I think most of the people tweeting about it right now didn't bother to read it, but Trump cited the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which has never been used to justify tariffs before. And he cited it to justify almost unlimited tariffs on almost all goods from almost every country. And all they said was that this law does not confer that degree of wide authority because it says that the powers in that law may only be exercised to deal with an unusual and extraordinary threat with respect to which a national emergency has been declared and can't be used for any other purpose. You just can't really claim that, like, oranges from Mexico are an extraordinary and unusual threat, or that trade deficits they're actually quite usual. Now, maybe you don't like that, but still. And then what they also reached in this decision, and this is what you were getting at with the non-delegation doctrine, which I think should, if anything, be brought back with more of a punch, that if this statute did delegate the authority that Trump claims it does, they say it doesn't.
Yes. Right.
If the court says it doesn't, if it did, that would be unconstitutional because you can't have Congress just give the president a power that's specifically given to them in the Constitution, right? We wouldn't accept that in any other situation. I mean, it's feckless and pathetic that they're even willing to do this, but that's the state of modern Congress. But that's not how it works. The same way that the president couldn't sign an executive order saying, now Congress will have the ability to vote and do pardons instead. You can't
Yeah,
just like modify the Constitution like that.
a good example is like, so suppose that Congress like delegated the House of Representatives impeachment power or the Senate's ability to try impeachments to some kind of executive branch there. So yeah, I think it is true. And what Brad is saying is absolutely true. The court is using a canon of statutory construction known as the constitutional avoidance doctrine to say we're going to assume the good faith of Congress, and we're going to assume that they didn't intend to pass a law that would be unconstitutional by the non-delegation doctrine. And by the way, there are other canons that also support the court's ruling here. For example, the legislative history. Some judges don't like to use legislative history, but here it's quite clear that the EPA, right, that was passed in response to like Nixon's overreach on certain tariffs that he was imposing at the time, and that they specifically crafted a statute that would like be different from this very broad wartime tariff statute. And it's actually we're getting really in the weeds now too, but the court didn't even find that the trade deficits weren't an unusual and whatever the terminology is that Brad cited, which is the correct terminology. They just said per se, right? They did find that with respect to that the tariffs on the fentanyl stuff, those kinds of tariffs, they did not sort of meet that, or they did not directly address that issue. But they just said straight up that you can't consider trade deficits one of these unusual circumstances per se, that there's a separate statute, a separate provision that Congress provided for that any kind of trade imbalance would need to be addressed through those procedures, which puts like a cap on the total amount of duty and then a time limit on the total amount of duty. And so really on all fronts here, it was absurd that everyone was acting as though Trump could do this all the time, no matter what. And what Trump was arguing for, and it's funny, in court he was saying things like, well, don't worry, this legislation and the kind of limits that you've imposed here, Congress, they do matter because they stop Trump from himself. Trump can look to the guidelines in the statute, and he'll stop himself from conflicting with what Congress wanted. So that was a little funny, but yeah, no, people are definitely taking it out. They haven't read the opinion. You're right about that, especially the commentators on Twitter.
I will say though, it's interesting because I consider myself an independent these days, really. And so I was very critical of the Biden administration's abuses of executive power. I cheered when the courts struck down his attempt to unilaterally cancel student debt without an act of Congress. And in fact, in direct defiance of Congress, he tried to get them to pass one and they refused to. And he tried to do it via executive order, in a not too dissimilar way of citing old federal statutes that weren't intended for broad-based student loan cancellation, and it was struck down by the Supreme Court. I cheered, and so did Kat Turd, and so did Stephen Miller, and all these people. It wasn't a judicial coup then, and I don't think it's a judicial coup now, which is also funny because suddenly I'm seeing like MAGA types argue that courts can't block the will of the people and the people voted and yada yada yada. And I'm like, hold on, aren't the right side of the spectrum, aren't we we're a republic, not a democracy crowd?
Yeah,
right? Aren't we the crowd that doesn't think you get whatever you want just because 51% of people vote for it? Like, I've always never supported the idea of direct democracy. I don't care if 60% of the public want a hate speech law. That's why we have a First Amendment. So they can't have that, right? These things are built in a counter-majoritarian way for a reason. And it's traditionally been progressives who bristle at that and don't like it, and conservatives who defend it. And now, because it's their guy who won an election, they're like, the will of the people. I mean, did they say that judges are thwarting the will of the people when judges blocked Biden from canceling student debt? Because that's a popular policy. I disagree with it, but it's a popular policy.
It was a super popular policy, and for sure. Now, I'll take exception to what you said, and you probably knew I was going to take exception. I think the language with respect to the student loan case, and I'm just going to bring this up, we don't have to spend all the time on it, like, was at least arguable for Biden. Waive or modify any provision of this title. I mean, that is broad authority that Congress is saying you can waive or modify any provision of the Higher Education Act. There, I think at least Biden has an arguable statutory. I actually think
So
he
I,
should
I
have.
think it would be I think I don't want to get into a whole
Yeah.
wormhole on it, but what I would say is I think the legislative intent did not indicate that you could do broad-based cancellation on that. But also, if they did, then I'd consider it an unconstitutional
Oh,
delegation.
interesting. Interesting.
Because it is the power of the purse, right? And it is Biden specifically went to Congress and asked them to include student loan debt cancellation in legislation. They said no, and then he went and tried to do it anyway. So I agree that it's not as totally absurd as the tariff stuff, but I did think it was unconstitutional and unlawful. And for the purposes of this conversation, it's just
Yeah.
important to note that no one had an issue on the right with judges blocking the will of the
Yeah.
people then, because to some extent, that is the point of checks and balances, is to block the will of the people or the passions of a momentary majority. And conservative intellectuals and commentators are the ones who are like supposed to support that, and now suddenly they're against it. I mean, Biden did other things. His attempt at a vaccine or test mandate
The
done
OSHA
via
stuff. Yeah.
executive action. That was struck down by the Supreme
Yep.
Court. A ton of Biden's policies were struck down by the Supreme Court. And that wasn't a judicial coup. And as much as I was very critical of the Biden administration, they complied with those rulings. There's a misconception on the Republican right that Biden didn't comply with the Supreme Court ruling on the student loan case. Now, I was a huge critic. I wrote probably tens of thousands of words of the different programs, but he did comply with the ruling.
Yeah.
That program he shut down, and then he tried other avenues. That's not defiance of a Supreme Court ruling, but some MAGA people will tell you, well, Biden defied the Supreme Court on student loans. He did use some unfortunate language discussing it, where he said, like, the
We'll try
Supreme
something else,
Court
we'll go
won't
around it.
stop me.
Yeah.
He really shouldn't have said it like that. But in action, he didn't defy the Supreme Court. He pursued his policy goals through a different avenue that was then further litigated. And the actual program the Supreme Court struck down, he didn't move forward with. So I do think that's an important point of clarification, because a lot of Republican or Trump supporter types, and it might just be X as kind of an extremist echo chamber, I don't know, but a lot of them seem to think that happened in a way that it didn't actually take place. And I say that again as a huge critic of all of it.
No, I appreciate that. Listen, I'll resist the temptation to get into the weeds on the actual student loan issue, because it is kind of a different issue, and the one that you're addressing is more the structural issue. And I appreciate you saying that he didn't defy the Supreme Court, because it's often, pulling your hair to try to get people to acknowledge, no, I know that like what he said was bad, and this is like the same thing of like Biden with all of his gaffes, but really, look at the different programs. They don't cover nearly as many people. They're not giving this broad universal relief. It's targeted with under different statutory authorities. One is like the save plan. So yeah, I really appreciate that you have dug into the weeds and that difference. So I appreciate that. And instead of focusing on the actual student loan comparison, I do actually want to focus on what's happening to the party, your old party, and some of the fissures that have emerged within the party. I guess I'll start first on, rather than the rule of law point, which I think you've kind of explained well, let's talk about the tariff policy in general. And I think it's a great example, because it brings to some of the rationales that the administration itself provides seem as schizophrenic, or where there's cognitive dissonance, as the different interests behind, or the different parties that compose the Republican Party today. So talk a little bit about, well, what is behind this tariff policy? Is it all corruption? Is there some there? And how does it help explain the differences or fractures within the party today?
Well, I keep seeing these memes, and obviously memes oversimplify stuff, but to some extent they can also capture untruth. And I keep seeing these memes of Trump where it's like Trump announces tariffs, and then it's like the MAGA person, art of the deal. then it's like Trump cancels tariffs, art of the deal. Or it's like Trump announces tariffs, creating jobs, and then it's like Trump cancels tariffs, creating
can I just
jobs.
Pause? It was hilarious, and I'm sure when you read it, to see the court like summarize all of the shit that was happening with the tariffs and their increases, and that. So just seeing that play out in real time, it in a court document, it really was watching that meme over and over. But sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, of course, but I think it gets to a fundamental divide in the GOP because the GOP used to be a fusionistic Reaganite party where one of the planks was, at least in the ideological core, of course, their politicians didn't always enforce this or follow through on it, was some commitment to free markets and free trade and limited government and fiscal conservatism. But there's been this crack up that represents where there's a new wave of kind of populist nationalism. Stephen Miller agrees far more with Bernie Sanders on economics than he does with Ronald Reagan. Steve Bannon agrees far more with like old school left-wing economics than he does. Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, is a longtime Democrat who supports like tax the rich, very left-wing economic policies. So he's just a worlds away from a free market Republican type. Yeah, but there are some people in the administration who still I think of like a Scott Bessent, for example, the Treasury Secretary, is probably at his heart, given his background, more of a free trade, free markets guy. And in fact, some of his comments before joining the administration suggest that he knows a lot of the criticisms of the tariffs to be true and has, for whatever reason, maybe he thinks he can do damage control on the inside. I don't know, but he's decided to join the clown car. I can't understand that decision, but whatever. That's kind of an aside. So there is this internal tug of war between free market conservative types, you know, the people who agree with the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Those types had a lot more control and play in the first Trump administration. Because when you think of the Trump 1.0 policies, which honestly I agreed with probably a majority, I probably disagreed with maybe 30%. They cut corporate taxes, cut personal taxes, deregulated the economy in a whole host of ways. And they still spent a lot of money and ran deficits, unfortunately. But then they were small scale tariffs on specific goods. There wasn't and I think those tariffs were harmful, but they were contained enough that they didn't derail the economy. And so prior to COVID-19, which was kind of a black swan event, and we could talk about how Trump didn't handle it amazingly, but prior to that, the economy was actually in a very good place in Trump 1.0. And the policy regime was traditionally kind of free market-esque, more or less. Around the edges, you could quibble. This time, I think the nationalists and populists, this administration, are basically in charge. And the policies are incoherent. They're all over the place. There's simultaneously some stuff that seems almost intended to be more kind of that old free market type, but then there's like the 10% flat tariff, there's the policy rules, regulations, and we're going to bully businesses and tell them what prices they have to charge and all sorts of other things. And I just really don't have any idea what it is that Republicans actually stand for or believe. I mean, there's a few through lines I can still identify, but really a coherent ideology or principles underlying a lot of this stuff is hard to identify for me these days, increasingly.
No, I appreciate that. And for me as well, it does seem like a different faction is in charge this time. I will note that, well, two things. The first is the way in which Trump, a lot of his policies start to mirror, I don't know, they remind me of like a communist command economy style situation where, for example, I'm sure you don't agree with a lot of the price caps on goods that they're that he's just like floating out there. Well,
when he yelled at Amazon because Amazon was going to add the tariff prices, and he's like, "You do not do that."
Yes, and also he's like yelling at Apple. He's like, do not pass the cost on to the consumers of the tariffs that I'm imposing. So he feels like a communist. He's like going into the schools or into universities to like command and control what the universities are going to say. So a lot of the policies of the Trump administration 2.0 seem like directed at coercing private conduct to be more nationalistic, to be more, and it really is approaching I don't know, some level of almost leftist populist nationalists in some cases, I would say, or they resemble them. Now, I don't think the leftists are happy for some other reasons. I think that there are differences, but there are aspects of that where I see it and I'm like, yeah, Brad's gonna hate this. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, to be clear, like the Trump administration is not like a left-wing
Yeah, I know.
administration. There's tons of things where they're
Yeah.
not. But on some of this economics and the role of government stuff, if you're describing politics in like a big government, small government way, I mean, they're way on the big government side. It's not a coincidence that some of the biggest cable news defenders of the Trump administration are like self-avowed former Marxists and lefties. That's not a joke. I mean, I'm referring to Batya Ungar-Sargon, who to be clear, I'm personally friends with. I think she's a lovely person. I just disagree with her on almost every issue. I mean, she's a self-professed Marxist a few years ago even, and now she's like the strongest champion for Trump's policies. In a different era, that would be unfathomable for the Republican Party, but it's kind of not now. Peter Navarro, the guy who Trump listens to for his trade policy advice, not only publishes books where he cites fake economists that are just him by a fake name.
Yeah.
I'm not joking. That's a
No.
real thing. People can look it up. He's also like economic progressive. He basically agrees with like Bernie Sanders on economics, and I strongly don't. But I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought. But you get what I'm saying
Yeah,
here.
no,
It's just like the through line isn't there anymore. I don't know what's going on, and you end up with. Ironically, for the drain the swamp people, when you have the government doing this, it becomes a matter of who has the best lobbyists, who has the best connections. I mean, I'll give you an example that I actually personally disagree with, but I find kind of insane. The TikTok ban, right?
Yeah.
I disagreed with banning TikTok, but Congress passed a law banning TikTok. The President of the United States signed it into law, and the Supreme Court upheld it as constitutional. And yet Trump has just said, because he is well connected to a TikTok donor, and because people like him on TikTok now, he thinks, at least. That's not my experience, but maybe I'm just not on that side of TikTok. I'm more plugged into like the woke crazy people on TikTok. But he's just choosing to not enforce that law. And the law only contained one provision allowing for a delay, and only under certain conditions that weren't actually met. But even then, maybe you give him the first delay. He's delayed it twice now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just not
and he didn't do
doing
the delay the right way as well. No,
he didn't. He didn't.
Yeah,
but even if you're going to give him the first one,
yeah,
to be as charitable as possible, the second delay is just totally legally illegitimate. Like he's just not doing the law. And why? Again, it's just because of Jeff Yass's money, partially, one of the major owners of TikTok being a huge Trump funder, and then like people he likes telling him don't do it. But it's like you swore to faithfully uphold and execute the laws of the land. And this, I was an opponent of it. Yeah. I didn't support this ban, but he should enforce the law. And like that's insane to not do. It's flown under the radar,
and he wipes his ass with his oath, and you're absolutely correct. That law was passed in a bipartisan fashion. Trump was the initial one of the major
he flipped on it.
Who was pushing for it in the first place. Biden ends up signing it into law, unanimously upheld as not a violation of the First Amendment in any respect by the Supreme Court of the United States. And just now not enforcing it whatsoever. That I think is an example, of Trump just not giving a shit. And it's even more ironic given the tariff rationale, where he's being so punitive to China, so antagonistic to China. You think that following
but not banning
but their own thing. Yeah,
I mean, again, I didn't support the ban, but like if you're going to say that something is a national security threat, I feel like you have a better argument for TikTok than you do for like every imported good in the world. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like the national security threat of advanced technology and data gathering is probably more significant than like apparel.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's just another instance here where up is down, down is up. The policy I was going to push to, and I think it's going to help us transition into the next topic I wanted to talk to you about, was Medicaid. You had Josh Hawley from the Senate, senator from Missouri. That's right? Missouri.
Yeah, he's Missouri.
Yeah. Came out and said, be very careful, Republicans, because we have a new base now. And that new base relies heavily on Medicaid. And there's the new kind of like working class Trump coalition. We have to remember like that base is going to be highly affected by things like Medicaid. and he's kind of giving the game away a little bit. And I think ultimately we're still going to have a lot of significant Medicaid cuts. But that I think puts squarely in division this new bill, this budget reconciliation process. And when I was thinking about it and thinking about who to talk to about this, yesterday I talked to some schizo person and she didn't really know what the hell was going on with the bill. It was not. She thought that when we were talking about balancing the budget, that it referred to some like metaphysical balance, like it's going to help us balance each other. It's crazy. Yeah, I'm gonna put the video up.
All right, so just on that, before we get into this, streamers do this a lot, and I'm not shading you at all, but like the TikTok live debate bros or whatever, the Deans, the Parkers, the they're talking on TikTok live, and they're talking to people who have no idea about anything. And to me, that's kind of like the left-wing streamer equivalent of Charlie Kirk debating 18-year-old non-binary people and like owning them because he's a professional political analyst who knows more than they do. So it's easy.
Brad,
I find it kind of lame.
Listen, in defense of me, I'm going to defend myself in two ways. Well, first, I put out a call on Twitter. I want to talk to someone who's willing to defend this bill. And two, I didn't know that she thought that like the person I was bringing on was not going to know what balancing the budget meant. Oh my God, hang on a second. Balancing I think I need to upgrade to Pro live to Zoom. So just give me. I think I'm going to upgrade to Pro. Okay. So just give me 1 second. Wait 1 second. Be right back, folks. All right, so you can still be heard, but I just need to upgrade to Pro real quick. I did not know I needed to do this.
My face has gone missing. Yeah. No, I don't even mean to shade you with that. That's just my complaint. And listen, I make fun of crazy people on TikTok and do other stuff where it's like you're not engaging with the smartest version of the other side. I understand. But I just would find it more interesting. And I've in the last few weeks, I've tried to reach out to people to host debates and conversations on my channel. And interestingly, I've gotten crickets from a lot of the right-wing media folks who constantly wanted me on their shows or wanted to collaborate me or work with me during the Biden administration when I was a huge critic of most things about Biden and Harris. And interesting how that works. But even some of the left-wing types that I've tried to get involved with, I don't really want to talk to me either, it seems, because I think it's just easier to like talk to some Trump supporter who thinks that, like, I don't know, Marxists have taken over their every kindergarten in the country and all are teaching trans pronouns to every 5-year-old. And I don't know, just like I see these clips of them talking to these Trump supporters and I'm like, listen, these are not representative Trump supporters and they're not like equals to you, right? If you're a smart political commentator influencer who does this full time, talking to randos on TikTok live, I get that it's like fun content, but I would hope you would also be open to debating smart people or at least people who are professionals.
No, I totally agree with that, to be clear. And that's why I am, I love bringing people on who are like the quote cream of the crop. I'm talking to Viva. Do you know who Viva Frey is?
From Twitter. Yeah, I know. I recognize that name from Twitter.
The thing is, he's a full-time influencer, right? But even like the cream of the crop of the Trumpy people, when they're debating, I was on Tim Pool a second time. Oftentimes it really feels like it's tongue in cheek. Sorry, I just fixed the Zoom thing. So just give me 1 second real quick to transition back. So we have unlimited time now. I just paid for Zoom.
Wow, I'm honored.
Yeah, you should be. Should be fucking honored. Okay, cool. And then we do this transition. And the meeting's being transcribed. I don't need the meeting to be screened out. Okay. Transition. Cool. All right, we're good. Yeah, no, and the problem I feel like is oftentimes the most prominent voices aren't necessarily the quote unquote most serious. And we'll get into this, I think, at the end of this of our little segment here about our power rankings of some of these MAGA influencers. But who would you consider like the intellectual class of MAGA influencer? And like, are they willing to debate? Like, are the Stephen Millers aren't debating, right? The ideological.
Well, Stephen Miller's a little different because he's literally the deputy White House chief of staff. So I don't really expect him to be like hopping in TikTok lives or hopping on Twitch streams. But I mean, he does television interviews and other stuff where he gets challenged. I agree with you. I mean, to some extent, I mean, you try to find the sweet spot of people with big audiences who are notable, who also, are somewhat intelligent or have some command and aren't just total grifters. People that I look to tend to be people who are like mostly Trump. So you look at like, and I don't agree with them on a whole host of things, but you look at like an Eric Erickson or a Ben Shapiro, and I think because 5 or 10% of the time they will break with Trump, I can take their arguments defending him much more seriously. Whereas there's some people like the Benny Johnsons of the world who
Yeah,
I
that's what
would
I mean.
debate, but he's just so unserious. Like Trump could do anything and he would just twist himself in a pretzel to support it. So I
Did,
understand that struggle.
did you see the
Um,
Kamala crash comparison where before when there was that like
yes,
bad, yeah,
I played that on my show.
oh, so
That's
it
what I
was
mean.
so delicious. Can you explain that for the audience?
Yeah, so when the stock market crashed after Kamala was made the nominee, Benny like went on his show and talked about how terrible this was and how like Americans were having their finances ruined. And then when Trump did his whole trade war thing, I think, and the tariffs plummeted, he literally went on his show and was like, "You don't
What
need
is
money.
money?
Struggle, and scraping by builds character." And I'm like, dude, how do you look yourself in the mirror? Because what I don't even understand about that is you don't even have to do that. You know what I mean? To like keep your MAGA audience, to get clicks, to get views. You don't have to degrade yourself that much. Like I don't think they were asking for that. Were they? Like,
I think that there's like a way. Even among Shapiro, even among the people who like supposedly they have more reputation to give up or whatever, they can't ever like directly go against the master. There's a way of criticizing Trump where like I don't like what his advisor is telling him. I don't think this will be good for him, where it doesn't undermine like the underlying character of the president. But like, what does Benny Johnson offer for his commentary other than being a pure sycophant? Like what is his value add beyond Trump? And I'm skeptical if there's anything there that if he knows, right, that his entire audience is premised on being in the good graces of MAGA. And so you're never going to get a critical take from Benny Johnson or indeed someone like Jack Posobiec, because what are they outside of Trump world?
I mean, smart marketers, I
Yeah.
guess. I mean, they do something well in terms of drawing massive eyeballs. And there's a lot of people who try to do what they do and it doesn't work. So they have to have some sort of insight into the zeitgeist among MAGA or into digital. I would say like Benny Johnson, he is a serial plagiarist, by the way. Like that just goes under the radar. He was fired from a bunch of jobs for literally just stealing people's work. So
Is
he's
he a
always been
BuzzFeed
kind of
guy?
yeah, he's the
Yeah.
one who got fired by BuzzFeed for just stealing people's articles. So he's always been kind of a laughingstock in serious media and journalism. But I mean, you don't do those kinds of numbers on YouTube and build that kind of digital audience empire without doing something right strategically. It might not be like moral or honest or have integrity, but I mean, they clearly do have some sort of skill set that lends to that I honestly somewhat try to learn from and try to emulate because part of my goal is to reach more people and build an audience and then steer them more in the direction of my beliefs. But I guess I'm not willing to go so far as that. And honestly, I feel slightly what you just described. I wasn't quite as much as you described, but like in the first Trump term, I would say and I still have a lot of followers who voted for Trump and who lean Trump and lean Republican. But in the first Trump term, I did more of what you were saying, where I was saying like Trump is making a mistake here, and this isn't truly MAGA, or this isn't truly, going to put America first. I just did a lot more of the tap dancing. This time around, I just don't give a fuck anymore. Like it's so much worse than I thought. It's so extreme. He's setting so many precedents that are going to come back to haunt the right. He's just setting the stage for the next Democrat, ignoring court rulings, revoking people's visas over their opinions, all sorts of things that I think a president AOC would take and run with, or a president
My girl.
whoever, Jasmine Crockett, God forbid. But it's just so, and I don't have the access, like because I've never been a full Trump supporter. I don't have the incentive to like I wouldn't anyway, but I don't have the incentive to kiss the ring and just defend the thing of the day because no matter what, like I'm not invited to the influencer briefing. I tried to get in. They won't let me in.
You
Like,
didn't get the Epstein files binder. That is
oh
one
my
area
God.
where even the crazy person I talked to yesterday. Now I don't know if this is true, but where there is this like anti-Epstein attitude and like this conspiracy attitude where they're pretty, or at least they say they're really pissed that they haven't gotten the real story from the Department of Justice yet, and that's how usually they'll.
But like, hold on. Of all their conspiracy theories,
Yeah.
I don't know very much about it. Is that the craziest one? I don't think it is. I
don't think it's the craziest conspiracy. What I mean to say is they are thinking that there's like a very, very intricate plot that they're waiting to get, and they can't understand.
Like, some of them have gone
rationalize.
against Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, because once they went in to be in charge of the FBI, they looked at the files and they're like, wait, there's no scandal here. And people think they're like compromised now.
Yes.
I think it's probably just more likely that there isn't anything there, but I still, with the Epstein thing, it's not not like QAnon, right? Like, the suicide is sus, and he did have a lot of powerful connections, like
including Trump. I wholeheartedly agree that there is it is super sus as hell. All I'm trying to say is that's one area in which their mind has been so primed by even the people now in charge of the FBI who are telling you nothing to see here, folks. That's one area where I find that the dam breaks
when they did the
bit.
binders, I actually saw a lot of MAGA people criticizing the Trump administration over that. So you're right. I mean, it's not like they'll literally I think they'll defend something. It's hard to parse exactly what is and what isn't. I think they would defend almost anything in the name of owning the libs. But on something like that, where it's like an intra-MAGA issue, they are still willing to criticize Trump, I guess, which I guess is better than nothing. But
it's few and far between issues, and it's one that I push on a lot when I have someone like, why did they release the Epstein files? Presupposing that there is, because obviously they're working under that assumption as well. But I do want to, that was an interesting little side rail, and I'm glad we did it. But I want to get back into the big, beautiful bill, because how I brought that up was, Josh Hawley coming out and saying, Medicaid's very important. And I talked to this person yesterday who was unable really to fully understand what's in the bill, or even what a government deficit is or a budget is. And it was pretty tough. But and as I was thinking of who to talk to, I think you came up in my mind. I'm like, because there's going to be things on here that he probably agrees. They're extending and deepening the Trump tax cuts. They're cutting some parts of the government that you probably don't like and that I probably do like. And so give me your assessment. But at the same time, I'm like, but this is a bomb to the deficit. Is he going to think like Thomas Massey, that this is wholly irresponsible and should not be passed? So the first question I'll ask you, and I will be direct about it, is if this bill, as President Polumbo, was in front of your desk, would you sign it? Number one. And two, give me your just general thoughts.
Oh, I would hold it up to the camera, pick up a lighter and light it on fire. And I would shut down the government before signing such a betrayal of everything that we say we stand for as fiscally conservative Republicans. I mean, there's things in it I like, to be absolutely very clear. I want to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, big parts of it at least. I want the expensing provisions for business and investment. Part of the problem with like a 2,000-page bill is there's going to be really good stuff in there that, I mean, there's even stuff in there that like Democrats would support or like. But then what they do is they hold you hostage, and if you vote against it, they'll say you voted against this provision for like health insurance for kids or for veterans benefits or something. My response to that, because if I was a politician, I never will be for this reason, I just wouldn't care about staying in their good graces or getting elected, is to tell them to F off. I think this bill, there is no ifs, ands, or buts. The exact number, the estimates aren't going to be 100% accurate. You're talking about multiple trillions of dollars added to the deficit over a decade, potentially as high as 5.5 trillion I've seen. I mean, that's like one of the biggest additions to the national debt of any single bill of all time. It's bigger than all, like, multiple massive COVID bills. I was against a lot of them.
Bigger than any of the Biden spending packages. Bigger than any of those. It's so
And
funny. Sorry to interrupt, but it's funny because you said 5.5 is one of the estimates. I brought up, I said to this woman yesterday, I was like, it's anywhere between 2.5, whichever estimate, 2.5 and 5 billion. And she's like, no, it's not 5 billion. It's trillion. It's 4 trillion, not 5 trillion. I'm like, who the fuck cares? That's bigger than anything that the Democrats passed under their tenure, and it's not costed at all. Sorry, go ahead.
well, and there's also just an absurd gaslighting about it all. Like Stephen Miller is out there saying, and Caroline Levitt is out there saying, this bill doesn't add to the deficit. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, don't insult my intelligence. Don't piss on me and tell me it's raining. If you want to tell me that, listen, we want to extend the tax cuts and Congress won't sign equivalent spending cuts, so this is the only way to do it. Okay, I guess. I still wouldn't support it, but at least be honest that, like, okay, we want to cut spending, but Congress won't pass a bill that cuts spending significantly. But don't just like lie. Like they're assuming when they rig the numbers in the Council of Economic Advisors, which is no longer a serious thing. They put like 5.5% GDP growth into the equation,
The
or
assumptions are
something
insane.
totally unrealistic to say that, the economy will be roaring and grow so much that the revenues will add up. And also there's just a lot of either misunderstanding or dishonesty about how this stuff works. And I covered economics for years as a policy correspondent. That was one of my first jobs in journalism, was specifically covering economic policy news. And Stephen Miller is out here saying keeping tax rates at what they are currently at can't add to the deficit. This is totally misinformation by the CBO. That is idiocy. Under current law, the Trump 1.0 tax cuts, some of them were made temporary. So they only go for a certain year, and then the tax code goes back to what it was. So under current law, tax rates are set to go up. We have projections about what revenue will be. They're not 100% accurate, of course, but I mean, they're in the ballpark of true. And then if you pass a bill specifically lowering the rates from current law, you're going to have a lot less tax revenue. Now, some people are like, well, cutting taxes can sometimes mean more revenue. And I'm like, okay, Art Laffer, that's true when the tax rate is 95%, right? Like,
Can
if
you
have
explain the Laffer curve to the audience so that people
yeah,
understand your
so
joke?
the Laffer curve, it's like a free market idea by a free market economist, Art Laffer, and it's true, but only in a very certain context. That if you have the idea is that higher tax rates can sometimes mean less revenue. If you have a 100% income tax, that will get less revenue for the government than a 30% income tax, because at 100% income tax, nobody would work if literally every dollar just went to taxes. In the same way, you might have a situation where if you had 70% income taxes and you cut them to 40%, you actually end up with more revenue because people work more. That's the idea behind the Laffer curve. And I think there are some contexts where it's true. This just isn't one of them, right? Like we're talking about the top marginal tax rate going from 37 to 39, or the corporate tax rate from like 21 up to 30. So we're not in that situation. And there's no credible, serious economist who can tell you these tax changes won't add trillions to the deficit. So I just don't like the gaslighting of it all. That's what bothers me. And then I view this kind of deficit spending as fundamentally immoral. I view it as intergenerational theft. Essentially, you want to enjoy things today, but then pass the bill on to your kids and grandkids to pay the interest payments and have the economic ramifications of it for the rest of your life. I'm not a balanced budget amendment person. I want some sort of fixed balanced budget amendment. So like you have to even it out over 10 years or something. Because I understand that during a recession, you're going to want to run a budget deficit. But I just think that then you should have to run a surplus in 2 years or whenever, so that it evens out over time. But this idea that you're going to just enjoy trillions of dollars of benefits, but then stick the costs to people who aren't even born yet, to me is immoral. I mean, imagine what would we think of of parents who took out a credit card in their kid's name, paid for a bunch of stuff for themselves, and then when they turned 18, that the kids get to start making the payments when the parents are like in their retirement home and no longer working. Obviously, I know that the federal government's finances isn't the same as your personal finances, is true, but some principles apply that can be compared. And Republicans are supposed to get that. Trump has said over and over again he would balance the budget. He's going to get rid of the deficit, all this BS that was never true. And I just think I actually care about this stuff. I think it's a betrayal. And a lot of it's like dumb stuff. Like they're literally including, I despise the SALT deduction. I think it should be nuked into earth. But they're including this tax loophole. So to explain SALT for people who don't know, SALT is a provision of the federal tax code that gives you a write-off on your federal taxes if you have high state and local taxes. So it particularly benefits people that live in like New York or California or Connecticut. And within that, it particularly benefits wealthy people who live in those states.
Because they itemize their deductions and they're able to actually take advantage of the SALT provision here. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And because they have higher marginal tax rates at the state level, like California has, I think, gradated income taxes and that kind of thing. But so the SALT basically lets you write off your state and local taxes on your federal taxes, but it's an incoherent idea. If you, as California or New York, decide you want X level of benefits, you have to have X level of taxes. And no one else is getting those benefits, so why should you get a discount on your share of the federal taxes because of it? To me, it makes no sense, especially from a fiscally conservative perspective, because what you're essentially doing is subsidizing and encouraging the growth of state and local government without them having to bear the full cost.
We would say it encourages progressive tax regimes in various different states. And I think one of the great marketing tools of getting rid of it for Trump was, well, this is just helping the rich in blue states. And people, and
which
it
is
was
kind of true.
It is, I guess, kind of true, but it also is. I believe the way in which it benefits, if you support those kinds of progressive tax policies, is it prevents this wealth flight that all the people going to Florida, everyone going elsewhere. So it is, even among its ardent supporters, either a completely provincial policy, and that's what the New York SALT people are. It's just to benefit their constituents, and so it's because it's just like a net benefit, or it's to encourage progressive tax schemes, which I think is why I like.
Obviously, Republicans
and Republicans should not, right? Yeah. But go ahead. So sorry. But that's the policy rationale for some people.
It's a special tax carve out that they are like quadrupling after they smartly reduced it in Trump's first tax bill
to 40,000 from 10,000.
Yeah, that overwhelmingly benefits well-off people in blue states. So it's like, even from the Trump perspective, something like that makes absolutely no sense other than as like a corrupt bargaining tool to these New York Republican lawmakers who I guess you could say are representing their constituents, but are just, pushing something that's like manifestly unfair and violates basic rules of tax fairness and isn't remotely fiscally conservative. So they're blowing up the deficit while including all sorts of like crap in it, like this massive tax loophole. So they're not even doing everything they can to minimize the impact on the deficit. It's like, no, they're just throwing it all together in this massive bill. I also hate that, and this isn't a Trump thing, they just do this now. I hate the whole omnibus practice, right? These 2,000-page bills. Call me quaint, but I think we should go back to the days where they voted on the different agencies and programs one by one. They would do, a DOD budget markup that would go through, committee and then the general vote and all this. And you want to talk about Doge, which I think turned out to be kind of a joke. And I don't want to get into that, but doing it all at once like this is how wasteful stuff gets through and how corrupt stuff gets through. Because they have, I think, 72 hours to go through these 2,000-page bills now.
Well, yeah, they passed it. They passed it in the middle of the night, and Republicans used to like blow a gasket over the supposed wow, the middle of the night bill. They're trying to sneak it before anyone has a chance to read. Well,
they were right. I think they were right to blow that gasket. But now they're doing the same thing.
And no one wants to read it or anything, or no one cares that they're trying to just pass it quickly. I wonder. I think that some version of this is going to pass. There's too much pressure, I think, from Trump, but I actually don't know if there is conservative resistance in the Senate. Which faction is going to win out? Is it going to be the fiscal hawks, the deficit hawks? Is it going to be the people? And we should get into this because this is probably the most sensitive of where our disagreements might lie. Although I don't know, it will be the Medicaid stuff. The Republicans who can't stomach humongous Medicaid cuts, which this is proposing. Something like $800 billion in cuts. This work requirement is another area where I think the kind of the Doge efficiency stuff. Like you're now proposing an additional work requirement on Medicaid, which is obviously going to increase, you know, a bureaucratic red tape. It's going to increase, I think, inefficiencies. I don't think it's going to significantly like decrease unemployment. But I wonder which of the factions is going to win out. And you know, if they get rid of SALT, because the Senate Republicans do not like SALT at all. They don't like that cap at all. Are you going to be able to keep on board these moderate, you know, Republicans, the you know, Mike Lawlers of the world? So I don't
New
know
York
which
crowd and them.
Before I ask you about Medicaid, do you have a sense, if you had to guess who's going to win out, what the final version of this might look like if it comes to pass? What's your sense in the Senate?
Well, I think it might not pass in the Senate. I mean, at least not in its current form, because that's the nice thing about the Senate, again, is the counter-majoritarian force. These guys aren't up for re-election every 2 years, so they have a little bit more insulation, making them easier able to push back on somebody like Trump. So I've already seen Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, and others saying, hell no, dead on arrival, we're not voting for this. And unless some Democrats cross over, or they convince, which I find very unlikely and implausible, or they convince a couple of these holdout Republicans somehow. I mean, it could not, or what could honestly happen is they change it in significant ways that then it can't pass the House. Like they get rid of SALT, they, you know, sunset some of the tax cuts, like they reduce the deficit impact, they do a bunch of stuff and they send it back. And then maybe, and this touches on the Medicaid thing, because like maybe Josh Hawley holds out to change, to not cut as much from Medicaid. I don't know. And then it goes back to the House and it can't pass. I mean, this is part of the problem with, like, they have very raised within majorities and they have very little uniting beliefs anymore. I mean, you end up in a pretty dysfunctional place. It will, I guess, become a test of how much punch does Trump still have? How afraid of him are people actually anymore? I think the House will ultimately be much more likely to be bullied into submission by Trump's whatever Trump wants. So if the Senate modifies it significantly in ways the House doesn't like, Trump might be able to bully the House into passing it anyway, because they're all just constantly up for re-election and scared of a primary challenge.
And that will almost,
Senate,
certainly be
by design is not.
Yeah, it'll be a less fiscal destructive bill, I assume, coming out of the Senate. Although, you know, who knows with the Medicaid stuff. So let's not belabor anymore. Elephant in the room, Medicaid thoughts.
Honestly, I haven't been focused on that aspect of the legislation, so I'm almost not even prepared to discuss it. I would have to look into it more. I've just been talking about the deficit impact and the tax cuts.
And that's enough for you.
I guess to me, it's like enough. It's a non-starter. If you're a fiscal conservative, how are you going to support a bill that's going to add 3 to 5 trillion to the debt? Like, it's a non-starter for me. And so the Medicaid thing, I don't know. It's a whole can of worms. I would need to to read about it more. I think it is indisputable that Medicaid has morphed into something much bigger than it was ever intended to be, and that people are now covered by Medicaid who are not the traditional single mom with multiple children, or, you know, indigent people who are essentially able-bodied adults with incomes significantly above the poverty line, who just can't afford healthcare because it's so freaking expensive for so many other reasons, that the healthcare system is so broken and so complicated. Yeah, I guess I almost am not even really prepared to get into it.
No worries.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. I expected the first take from you, and I'm glad that I was able to. And that's one thing, by the way, that I think people should be predictable in that, or at least somewhat predictable on some of the stuff in ways that I think, like, Trump is not necessarily predictable. But I find it comforting that there are at least some influencers who you can kind of predict where they're going to lie on certain things. And so you know, I'm glad that that when you said that you're going to burn it, that I'm like, yep, that's Brad. By the way,
I mean, it's almost a sign of, like, I mean, you don't want to be totally ideologically predictable, because you don't want to be a blind ideologue. But it's almost a sign of some sort of corruption, or just going with the flow, or like following the crowd, if you're not predictable, because you should have principles that you stand for. And I have, like, maybe 3 things I've stood for. One of them is free market capitalism. One of them is free speech. And under free market capitalism is fiscal conservatism. So, like, if you can't predict that I'm going to oppose adding trillions to the deficit, and oppose people, like, being thrown in vans for writing op-eds critical of Israel, I agree that a lot of people who said they believe those things are now apologizing for those things. But like that's to me a massive red flag of their actual integrity or principles. People should be more or less predictable if you have a value set that is coherent and consistent. Obviously, you don't want to be like a, a predictable in the sense of, oh, well, we know he's going to defend whatever Trump does, but predictable in terms of like a mathematical sense that, okay, like this person is a socialist. So of course they're going to support X, Y, or Z socialist policy. Or this person is, a fiscal hawk. So of course they're going to support this. This person is a non-interventionist. So of course they're going to be opposed to this. This person is a hawk. So of course they're going to want this. It's like, if you're not, then how are you even deciding things? If it's not based on philosophy, you're just like, what? Holding your finger up and trying to catch which way the wind is blowing. Like, that's not how this is supposed to work. Sometimes, sorry, I know I'm babbling a lot.
No, you're good. You're good.
I used to get the question asked to me when I was working in conservative media. People like haters who didn't like a criticism I had of a Republican would be like, how does this help Republicans get elected? Or like, how does this help us beat the Democrats? And I'm like, you and I have very fucking different ideas of what my job is as a political commentator and journalist. Like, I'm not a partisan operative, and I've never wanted to be. So I've always thought my job is to say the truth as I see it and say what I think is correct. And people can agree, they can disagree, but it's never been my concern whether this helps Republicans or will lose us a seat or anything like that. And so people have a warped view on the right. And I can't speak to as much how progressive media works, though I do know that some of the Biden stuff, why didn't they want to report on it? Definitely some partisan affiliations there. But like, that is not how media and journalism is supposed to work. You shouldn't be putting partisan considerations. You should just be trying to do your job. And obviously you can have an ideological bias, but not really supposed to be like openly partisan. Hot take, I guess.
No, I hear you on that. On the Biden stuff, I think you're referring to like the mental competency stuff. And on that, I think the Jake Tapper revelations or interviews or whatever, I think are more properly calibrated. Though I think that there are some complicit members in the media are more properly calibrated to the administration itself, and specifically his inner circle and some of his advisors, where I think there are some pretty shocking moments, at least as alleged in this like media tour by Jake Tapper that I certainly wasn't aware of. Although I don't think that there's like this wide spanning media conspiracy in the sense that people were reporting on Biden's cognitive health. It was a major issue.
But they were some of them were very viciously attacked for it. If you look at like Alex Thompson at Axios, the way when he was first talking about it, the dog pile from other journalists was.
Well, I saw it of Robert Hur. I saw it of Robert Hur. So I defended Robert Hur. And people will see me on the record. I went through the Hur report. I defended her on mentioning the cognitive issues. And I attacked Democrats who were being super unfair to Robert Hur in real time, contemporaneously, during those hearings. I thought it was absolutely absurd. So no, I hear you. There's definitely some sniping taking place of even Democratic people, or even people who are supposed to be, above above this kind of partisanship, like a prosecutor, although that it's a quaint notion right now. But so no, I definitely hear you on that. I think that there is something there. But I don't see it as this kind of, there's someone I talked to called Rob Noor who kind of alleges that even the Twitch people, even the down to the, everyone could see the cognitive decline was fully apparent, and you were still blah, 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 blah. I think that there are specific instances of quote unquote cover-ups and of unfair conduct that don't rise to the level of like, everyone was in on the same nature of a cover-up. I think in some cases it's like a partisan blinders. In some cases it's going with the flow. And in some cases it's an outright just not having a cabinet meeting for a year, not telling it to the American people that this guy isn't having cabinet meetings at all. So I see very different levels of complicity.
Let's talk about this a little bit, though, because
I
agree you can't speak about the mainstream media as a monolith. I know I do sometimes, and people do, but there were people asking tough questions. However, there were a lot of people who, like, for example, in the book, Tapper and others are talk about how, like, well, the administration lied to us. And it's like, well, the point is that if it was the Republican administration, you wouldn't have accepted their answers at face value. You would have been much more hardcore in terms of pressing on it. And then there was sort of a bias and groupthink among journalists. I mean, do you remember the concept of a cheap fake?
I do remember the concept of a cheap fake. That's right.
So the idea is there's something called a deep fake, which is a fake video.
It's a fake
and
video.
then, but of course, the videos that were being shared of Biden weren't fake. I mean, there are some, but like many
They're
of them
like
are
zoomed
real.
in
Like,
and like adjusted to the allegation was by the people using this concept to exaggerate in what was otherwise a normal interaction. There,
and what
there
I'm
were a couple
telling you
times
is
this
that there
happened
are
though, Brad. Right?
probably
There were a couple times in which this happened where they were zooming in when he was clearly like looking at an officer or something or talking to someone.
there are a couple
Yeah.
times, but they used this to just like dismiss a lot of the evidence. I can tell you this because I was on TV and I was talking about this at the time in 2020, 2021, and 2022, before this became like okay to say out loud in the last 6 months. And I was one of these people saying he's clearly in cognitive decline. And there was a real denial and pushback. I mean, MSNBC is probably the most egregious violator. Joe Scarborough and Mika
Scarborough's a piece of
Brzezinski,
shit. No, on that, like, he's lost all
they
credibility.
literally met with him and said to the
He's
camera,
the
to their
best person
audience,
I've ever. Yeah.
he's sharper than ever.
Yeah.
And then, like months later, we see him implode on
No,
camera.
I know, I hear you.
Those people that should stain their integrity forever, and they should not be trusted again.
So Scarborough, I put in his own camp, and I think that, yeah, I totally agree. But the thing is, I do view different levels of complicity here, and I think that there is like what you just said there was like, well, they would have asked the hard questions, and this is not something that people would apply to anyone in like conservative media vis-a-vis Trump. When I speak of like Fox News, like when you say like, is Fox News pushing hard enough against the Trump narratives in the various different cases or the lies of Trump? So I hear you, and I guess that is a kind of an implicit or tacit, I guess CNN and MSNBC are on the side of the Democrats, but we know MSNBC,
but they claim to be neutral.
Yeah,
right. Fox News is openly conservative,
but like, yeah, MSNBC I would put in the category of like the equivalent. I even think that they're trying to be the model of the Fox News on the left. CNN, we have the Jake Tapper clip, but what else do you have where he's like kind of going after Laura Trump? What else do we have from CNN? Is CNN not reporting on Biden's cognitive decline during the course of the?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's lots of clips of them downplaying, denying, suggesting that Republicans are attacking or misleadingly portraying this, and I think CNN is guilty of it as well. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't recite to you times and dates, but I've seen compilation after compilation of people dismissing this and downplaying it. I think there was a very, very real attempt, but I don't think it's some grand conspiracy. I don't think all these media people get together in a room and say, we're going to cover up for Joe Biden, but I think it's a subconscious bias and groupthink from behind the scenes at CNN. It's like 95% Biden voters and sympathizers. I think that's just probably objectively true. I've been on CNN. I've been in those green rooms. I've talked to the producers. I've seen the number that have pronouns in their bio. Like,
What's wrong with the pronouns? Leave the pronoun people alone.
It's a tell typically that if somebody emails me and they have pronouns in their bio, I would say it's 99% certainty they did not vote for Trump in 2024. Okay. Would you say that's an unfair assessment?
I'm not saying that's an unfair assessment. No.
All right. That's all I'm drawing. I'm not even saying anything broader than that, though I would. But I'm not even, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm just saying whenever there is groupthink at a place, NPR is a good example. I mean, have you seen the data that was unveiled by Early Berliner about like the percentage of Republicans in their newsroom? I think it was like literally one.
It's something insane.
Maybe zero.
It's something really skewed, yeah.
So even if there's not a grand conspiracy, anytime you have an echo chamber that complete or that kind of groupthink, it's going to cut in a certain direction. There's going to be extra layers of sympathy. But you would think that, for example,
of like the New York Times, right? And the Washington Post. But I know that their reporters were like, this was their beat. And they released some scathing articles from accounts from inside the administration. And so, you would expect, right, if this were that kind of situation. I guess that's why you're saying there's
but they also release op-eds downplaying and dismissing the entire thing. That's the problem with like sweeping statements about a place like WAPO, is they publish like thousands of articles a month by different people, and they say different things at different times. So I would agree with you. There was actually good reporting from different people at the New York Times and the Washington Post, but there's also op-eds from all these on both of their pages, totally downplaying and denying all of this and suggesting that it's, ageist or it's all like Republican cheap fakes and this kind of thing. So that's part of why you can't paint with a broad brush, but like, I need to go and I've been meaning to listen to the whole Jake Tapper book, but the excerpts that I've read, I mean, it's really bad. It's really
but the
bad.
really bad stuff for me, the shocking stuff is kind of the insider shit, is the degree to which, for example, Ron Klain was just out, like, you want to talk about unconstitutional delegations or whatever, that Biden was delegating policymaking to people like Ron Klain. And the cabinet meeting thing for me is stark, right? That, to me, that's something that Obama wouldn't do. If and I think the timeline that he puts it, at least in one of the interviews, I also haven't read the book, but I want to. I'm going to purchase the book to read it. I got through Abundance, and I have some thoughts on Abundance, and so I'm going through all these kind of like I don't know, left-wing Democratic copiums from the election. But that timeline that he gave, which was, I think, was like November 2023, have a cabinet meeting, and not until September 2024, after he's already dropped out, is another cabinet meeting. That, to me, is absolutely shocking. It absolutely means like he was not ready for 4 more years at all. Now, I would take 4 more years of Biden any day of the week, and I would cut off my hand to have Joe Biden in the office right now, even in the state that he is and was. But that is shocking. That is something that is horrible. You need to be meeting with your cabinet way more regularly than like once in a 10-month period. That's crazy.
But I have to, so this is why I have to say that I feel our national security was compromised by this very significantly. So, I mean, we had somebody who, like any elderly person in cognitive decline, had lucid moments and then not lucid moments, had good days and then bad days. But at any moment, and this is not exaggeration to say, the president of the United States at 4 a.m. on a Wednesday can be rushed into the Situation Room, handed the nuclear football and massive reports about incoming missiles, and could have the fate of humanity itself, not just America, everyone, in his hands. And we had somebody who forgot lifelong friends, who forgot the year his son died, like, who was so clearly not with it. And maybe you're right that the true culprits are the media, are not the media, but are the political operatives around Biden. Great. Well, that's a scandal of the Democratic Party.
It's a scandal. No.
And then what I'm saying, though, is that
it's a scandal. Yeah, 100%.
The media was very closely intertwined with those people. If you don't think Ron Klain was in close communication with tons of mainstream media reporters and wasn't telling them things all the time, I heard things, and I'm layers removed from
that's
Democratic
different,
politics.
right? So Ron Klain, you think Ron Klain is over telling a New York beat reporter that, like, hey, Biden's not with it. He's not really.
No, I'm sorry. I don't think Ron Klain is, but I think other staffers were telling people that Ron Klain is actually running everything. Yeah. That's there were open secrets that weren't reported and should have been.
So Ezra talks about this where because he came out, I'm not going to say early, right? And so just be clear where I stood. I was against Joe Biden running for re-election. But one of my biggest errors is once he announced he was going to run for re-election, and the way Tapper tells it, it wasn't even a decision. Like, it was just something that they kind of sank into, and that by itself, like the fact that they weren't polling this, arrogant. It's so arrogant. It's beyond incompetent, and it's bad, really. But once Joe Biden decided that he was going to run for re-election, I took it as a fait accompli. I didn't speak out the way I think I didn't really like divulge that I was against Biden running for re-election the way that someone like, Cenk Uygur, for all of my disagreements with Cenk Uygur, for all my, I kind of laughed a little bit at Dean Phillips and poked at him a little bit. And that's to my shame as well. And so there is a way that people can just fall into that complacency. And the way Ezra tells us, so anyway, what I was saying is Ezra is considered one of the people who came out early. He came out in like 2024, at like the start of the year in like February. So that's early compared to most Democrats.
But do you understand how frustrating this is from right-wing media? Because we were saying this in the 2020 Democratic primary, that Biden clearly wasn't with it.
Well, I want to say I remember vividly where I was, and you're gonna hate this because I voted for Bernie in both in 2016 primary and 2020 primary, and I remember where I was on Super Tuesday and saying like, holy fuck, like this is not good. Like I did not. And when I saw Biden during the debates against Bernie during COVID and then against Trump, I was always with my head like, holy fuck, this guy looks so old. So it's never been lost on me. The guy's old, but I just view him as a fundamentally more moral person, even though there is corruption from Biden. I consider his pardons to be corrupt. And it seems like he was more willing. He expected the Department of Justice. In many ways, Tapper portrays him to be a little bit more Trumpian in some ways, and kind of like this Shakespearean Trumpian figure in some respects. Never to the degree of Trump. I want to just be clear about that. And I would, like I said, I would cut my arm off to have Biden as president. All this is to say, people recognize, and American people overwhelmingly, including myself, including everyone, were concerned about Biden's age. And so, yes, I agree. There's a scandal at the heart of the insiders near Biden. I 100% agree with that. But I just think that people overstate it and simplify. I'm glad that you're at least able to stratify a bit, or at least to make your different delineations. I think that is necessary. We need to talk about specific areas of failing. Otherwise, if you just say the Democrats all try to cover it up, it's kind of glazing over some of the real failings that exist in the media and certainly among the administration.
Yeah, well, but like Kamala Harris, for example, disgraced herself and lied knowingly to the American public about it many times. What she said about Robert Hur is indefensible, right? She maligned him as if he was lying, and she knew dang well, having been with Biden behind the scenes, exactly what he was and wasn't like.
Well, how much contact do you think that she was having with Biden? That's one thing where I'm like,
enough.
You think?
It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. Well, it wouldn't have taken much.
He's not. Can you agree? He's not senile. He's not senile.
Well, it really depends what you mean by that. I think he has, like any elderly person, they're not constant, right? Because so he has moments where he is sharper, and then moments where he is like lost and befuddled. That's how it works often with elderly people. And so I'm not claiming he was senile all the time and didn't know where he was and what was going on. But I think at times he was clearly confused and not with it and not in control or in charge, obviously.
Yeah, no. So, but like my understanding is that Kamala Harris was like kind of a maligned figure within the administration itself. It's funny. One thing that
you mean the borders are?
The borders are, right? Yeah. So one thing that Tapper brings up is people think that the refrain to, well, why doesn't Biden step down is, well, what about Trump? Like, do you really want Trump? But the refrain that was often heard from Biden people was, do you really want Kamala? And that's how they thought of her.
But that's their fault for picking her.
No, I agree that that's their fault for their fault for picking her. But it goes for me.
Maybe that's why they picked her.
I'm just like, yeah, maybe, right. That's the kind of, at this point, right. I've said publicly, so I'm not afraid to say it. It would not. I'm not saying that they did it. It would not surprise me if they hid a cancer diagnosis, and I think that that's true of you as well. But I just don't put anything past his insiders, which appear to be true believers, like totally, like Biden. Completely is the phrase wool in the eyes. I don't know what it is. But anyway, the last thing I'll say is I don't know how much FaceTime Kamala had with Biden. I don't know how much FaceTime like the attorney general or anyone in the cabinet had with Biden. And so that's another area where like I want specific evidence of like the degree. And I know it sounds ridiculous because it's his own VP. But let's be honest, guys, we're getting inside information that he wasn't really meeting with his major cabinet officials. And so I'm not convinced that Kamala was.
I mean, they still did events together, and they would have been behind the scenes together at these like public events, these meetings, these things, these photo ops. I get what you're saying, but I think she would have had enough access to know what's going on. And also all the staff talk too. I mean, I find it unimaginable that she could have really thought. So
paint me this picture, Brad.
Shape all 4 years.
Do you think that Kamala Harris is going to go to the American people and say, guys, Biden's senile. He's really challenged. Now maybe that is what you expected to happen, but it is not a standard that we would expect of any president or vice president to divulge their executive their conversations with the president and I just don't think that that's a realistic expectation, even if that's the right thing to do.
Let's be clear,
it's not something that you would expect any president to do.
I agree that it's unreasonable to expect a VP to throw them under the bus, but she didn't have to go attack Robert Hur so vociferously, and she didn't have to
on that agreed, and I agree with that.
She didn't have to so strenuously testify that he was top and had never been better. I mean, she was effusive in her praise for his mental acuity. What I'm saying is she could have just said little and not. I agree. It's unreasonable to expect a vice president to come out to the camera and say, my boss has gone senile. He's lost it. Though at a certain point, he's thrown her under the bus. So she might as well spill the tea. But Sure, I get that. She didn't have to go so far in debasing herself in defense of it. That's the thing I'm saying. And I,
I
I mean,
agree
I
with you on
already
the her
didn't
stuff
really.
because I think it's true. Like Biden comes out, it's one of the most Trumpian moments he's ever had. It's one of the most laughably tragic slash. It made me angry the day after her released his report. And he comes out and is like, "This is a disgrace. What's going on, man? What's going on?" And like just shitting on Robert Hur. I called him out at the time. And then he confuses the name of like the Colombian president with some other president. And so at the very press conference where he was trying to prove his mental acuity, he once again is like unable to perform on that stage. And so that is one of the worst moments. So yeah. So to the extent that you're
My
saying
favorite is the highlight reel of Biden talking to dead people, where
yeah.
he calls out to the crowd for the congresswoman who's like been dead for
Ooh,
several years, and
yeah.
it's like, is she here? Oh, come say hi, come up on stage. And he's done it multiple times to multiple different people. It's sad. I always have said this, and I want to be clear, like, because I don't want to come off as insensitive or like ageist, whatever that means. There isn't shame in aging. There isn't shame in experiencing cognitive decline when you're very old. Like, we should all be so lucky to make it that long and to live such a long life. And I don't hold it against Biden. The shame is in clinging to power and in him and his inner circle lying to the American people and not giving up power when they realized they knew damn well he was not fit. And they compromised our national security, and they burned their own integrity, and probably set the stage for Trump to become president again.
100% they did.
By
No,
screw-
yeah. So, and
So
Biden broke his most important promise, which is to restore the soul of the nation, and he fucked over the whole country and the Democratic Party, and it'll be a stain on his presidency for the rest of time. And Trump is undoing a lot of the things that he did, and Trump is worse in the second term than the first term, and so bringing about the second Trump era is not a good look for you. And I want to respond to one person in the comment, and I don't say this is bad of this commenter all the time, but I don't see Brad as being an apologist for how the media treats Trump. Certainly not of conservative media. I mean, he's coming on here and pretty viciously criticizing Trump media and stuff. And so I just want to be clear. Us talking about Biden, I don't think it should suggest that Brad is like applying an inconsistent standard to Trump. I hear him criticizing Trump and the Trump media folks. So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, a lot of people just think like that. Like, oh, if you're criticizing Biden, or why are you even? The craziest thing to me was the progressive TikTokers who were like, now that Biden has cancer, no more talking about his health. I don't want to hear anything about it again.
Wait, I'm not
just
on TikTok,
move
so
on.
I
And it's like,
didn't see that.
sorry, Olivia, Juliana, or whatever, we're not doing that, and you can't just like say, okay, well, he's not president anymore, so just move on. Obviously, you
But it's
should
a
be
huge
talking
problem
about
still, Brad. No, the thing is, and the reason why, and I'm not, you guys know me, and I'm willing to defend Biden on student loans. I'm willing to defend a lot of Biden's policies, and I'm willing to defend and go to the mat for that he's a much better president than Trump all the time. But the problem is, and why I'm not as much pushing back on Brad at the moment, is it's a clear and present danger to the Democratic Party right now. I'll just give you some names: Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Jerry Connolly, Joe Biden, Dianne Feinstein. We can't, and Nancy Pelosi is running for re-election. If we
That's diabolical.
It's diabolical. Like, we have an issue with old people in our party and being unable to realize
clinging to power.
It's time to pass the torch. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg will always be remembered for her failure to resign when it was time to resign. Maybe to the Brad's smiling a little bit because he gets an extra Federalist judge, and that is Amy Coney Barrett's seat. And I will say Amy Coney Barrett is my favorite of all the conservative justices now. But
I still think Gorsuch is daddy.
You're okay. Out to see.
He's also a handsome man. It helps. He's a silver fox.
My only Kick viewers. So I mostly my audience is on YouTube and on Twitch. My one like consistent Kick person said that you look like gay Clark Kent, and I don't know if that's
I get that a lot.
Oh yeah,
I'll take it.
But anyway, all I'm gonna say is we have a problem in the Democratic Party, and it's not just a past problem; it's a current problem. And so I don't really have a problem with Brad shitting on the Democrats for not giving up power, because it's something I believe as well and affirm. Okay, last topic.
Maybe we can agree on this.
Yeah,
we need a maximum age on the presidency and on elected office in general. Congress, representatives, we have minimums. We need a maximum.
I like that parallelism. I'll think about it some more. I haven't given it thought, but now I think we need to give it thought. Trump is the oldest person elected president. He's going to be the oldest president almost certainly. And yeah, it's something I have to think about, and it's something that I think the country needs to really strongly consider. I know I've taken you a little bit over time, but just the last thing I want to get through is we talked a little bit about some of the fissures and how they emerged vis-a-vis domestic economic policy, vis-a-vis trade policy. Now, just for the brief amount of time I have you left, I want to talk about it in some of the culture war issues, and I want to speak even more specifically about perhaps the fissure with respect to Israel-Palestine, the woke right sort of situation. So first, I guess my question for you, for the audience, can you explain the woke right phenomenon? What is it? Do you agree with the label? And can you talk about what the Republican Party is experiencing vis-a-vis perhaps Israel-Palestine, but more broadly like foreign interventionist style policy or support for this country or the other?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough question. And I will say that woke right is one of those things where it started out to refer to, I think, a kind of specific trend, but then the people that were attacked with it threw it back at the people who originally said it. And I'm not sure it means much of anything anymore, but originally I think it was used to refer to the kind of the right-wing people who are very, feelings over facts, who are almost like anti-American in their perspectives or and then it became thrown back at like the people who want to censor people and the pro-Israel people who suddenly don't want free speech or think we need safe spaces from anti-Semitism or whatever. I don't know. I think it's lost any sense of meaning, to be honest, the woke right thing. It's actually hard to parse. The kind of intra fights, one of the major lines is Israel-Palestine, but really that kind of maps onto a broader conflict between interventionists and uh, non-pejoratively like isolationists, isolationists, like the America First crowd. And I'm not saying that as a pejorative, just kind of because I think it's fairly descriptive. Um, I think that's the underlying thing. Like the big difference between the Candace Owens view and wing of the current like MAGA movement and the Ben Shapiro wing comes down to those questions, and then comes that a lot of it's filtered through Israel. I mean, it's a big divide on the right where conservative media and the older part of the party has kind of a muscle memory of supporting Israel, because that's tied up with evangelical Christian beliefs very closely.
Yeah.
And because just historically, I mean, Republicans have been a strongly pro-Israel party, but then I think the younger right and the kind of more edgy MAGA right doesn't have any loyalty to Israel and is very America first or isolationist in their foreign policy sentiments, and then is very online. And so is very horrified by a lot of the images and videos they see coming out of Gaza. And I certainly understand that response. And then the free speech stuff has been kind of a really key and telling divide, because anti-Semitism in Israel has always been kind of like a blind spot for Republican free speech warriors. I am pretty consistent on this stuff. So I think hate speech is free speech, and that includes anti-Semitism. And
Agreed.
then there's the whole argument over whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, which all of this is like a massive can of worms on the right that I think does divide a lot of people in the different factions. But then there's also weird bleed over. Like it's really hard to pin down and describe, because and Trump is simultaneously like all these people still like Trump.
Yeah.
And he's kind of papered over the cracks, and he kind of appeals to the different wings, like because he's ambiguous and incoherent enough on these issues that you can see what you want in him. So if you're Candace Owens, she's actually been very critical of Trump in the last couple months over this stuff. But prior to the election, you could say, well, Trump is going to like end the war, right? He's going to be America first. He'll negotiate a deal. And if you're Ben Shapiro, you can say, well, Trump is strongly pro-Israel and he's going to support Israel. And I think the Ben Shapiro crowd has been more correct about his actual policies, have been very pro-Israel. But at least in his rhetoric, there were times where he wasn't. And in his circles and in his administration, it's a very strange thing where he has people in his cabinet who are diametrically opposed in their foreign policy worldviews, right? Marco Rubio is an ultra hawk, hardcore Zionist. Tulsi Gabbard is a Zionist and is a little more hawkish on that, but is like an anti-interventionist type on other
More like a
things.
realist
JD
type,
Vance,
yeah.
yeah, JD Vance is much more of an anti-interventionist. And so the Republican Party is going through some sort of like metamorphosis on these issues, but there's a significant faction that hasn't changed their views. Then there's a faction that is very different on them than they used to be. And then there's a lot of people who are kind of in the middle or kind of still both. And it's a muddled and confused time in Republican politics.
No, I that was a really comprehensive, and I super appreciate that distillation. I guess the last two questions I'll ask you. First is, you have followed Trump now for years and years and years. What's your sense of the man on these issues? Do you think he's going to continue to be pro-Israel? Is there a chance that he pivots or starts to do something that Biden couldn't do, which is get a peace deal, get a ceasefire, stop the war? That's the first question. The second question, it is related, is one of the factions that's, I don't know if it's growing, and you can tell me how big you think it is among the Republican Party, which is critical of Trump from a anti-Israel perspective, are in fact the Groypers, the followers of Nick Fuentes. How do you
They're
see
big
that
fans
faction?
of me.
Oh yeah, how do you see that faction? And are they growing in influence? Are they embedding themselves within your party or your old party?
Well, the first question is honestly, I mean, good money is on Trump staying the pro-Israel course, but you can't rule it out because it's really a question of who talks to him last and who in his inner circle, what videos do they show him on his iPhone?
Doesn't
It
that sound
really
very
comes down to
Biden-y
that.
to you? Like, you see the way you describe that, doesn't that sound like very Biden-y in the sense of, oh, it's his advisors, it's who he talks to? Sorry, just to interrupt, but I know you're.
It's true, but in this case, it's true. Trump has a couple issues throughout his political career. You can go back to 2012, and he doesn't like trade, likes tariffs, is opposed to immigration, and a couple other things. But on basically everything else, he's done 180s and can often be swayed by the last person he talked to. And I mean, he's never going to be like Israel shouldn't exist, like anything
Right,
like
right, right.
that. But in terms of negotiating an end to the war or pressuring Netanyahu or cutting off aid, I think if Candace Owens could get a meeting with him, she might well be able to talk him into it. It's going to be a question of his chief of staff who has access to Trump. And right now, I mean, you look at like his ambassador to Israel or some other maybe special envoy or something, Mike Huckabee is a high-ranking official. He's like, you could not find a more extreme pro-Israel person than him.
It's crazy.
And I mean, yeah, some of the views he has are, I didn't even know those viewpoints existed. That's how shocking some of them are to me. But like, I think I never say never. He really is somewhat unpredictable on these issues. It's going to be a question of what his PR, first of all. I mean, if people really wanted an end to the war, I think the one smart thing to do would be to like stop blaming Netanyahu and start blaming Trump. Like if Trump was turning on, Trump is an obsessive cable news viewer. And if every time Trump turned on CNN or MSNBC, they were talking about Trump's casualties in Gaza of the day, right? And they were constantly
Hmm.
blaming him for the death and destruction of these people, I think that might get to him because obviously I think the blame is or the responsibility for it is on Israel and their military. They're choosing to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
the US is blessing a lot of it and supporting it. And I think if it was more directly tied to Trump, he might feel pressure about it because he can be publicly pressured, but then it really is a matter of his inner circle, I think, and who has access to him, what they're telling him, what information he's receiving. And as long as it's people who are, hardcore in the Israel camp, I would expect him to continue, but he really is unpredictable in that stuff. On the Groypers, I mean, they're definitely a significant faction. They're not totally fringe. I mean, NPR reported on this, and obviously I think they're biased, but this reporting is true. There are multiple high-level Trump officials with very close ties to Nick Fuentes. I mean, that's a thing. I mean, he's a very extreme and unpalatable person, and he's sort of cordoned off in his own little niche, but like the idea of policing your own, or what's the phrase that people use, but like keeping them at an arm's length, the crackpots and crazies, is kind of out the window. I mean, maybe to some extent that's a response to the zealous cancel culture and purity tests and all this stuff, but like now there's no standards at all. So I think I'm about to sneeze.
No, you're good. You're good.
But the actual anti-Semitism is all over X, and it's like reprehensible. But a lot of far right people are not particularly bothered by it now. I don't know. It's hard to say how much influence someone like him really has, but not zero. And certainly, I mean, that's to the disgrace of the Republican Party that someone like this is at all welcome and not totally persona non grata. Though to be clear, he's still kind of persona non grata. Like he's banned from even like CPAC, which is a clown car.
It seems like a lot of that is because of personal reasons, right? It seems like Charlie Kirk doesn't
that's
like
true
him
as well.
personally, you know, like he just gets into these feuds. But if he were maybe a touch more Machiavellian or a touch more like willing to be, build some bridges, he might be more successful.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, he and his little buddies have been they've targeted me in the past. And I will just say, yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. They really have a thing for gay people, and I will just say he's obviously homosexual. There's no, I mean,
How do you know?
just everything about him screams repressed bottom. I mean, it's not even close. Like there's some story he was telling where everyone on Twitter, and he's like, I had a crush on a girl in high school, and everyone's like, girl. I would bet money on it. He's been like caught on camera with like cat boys. I mean, some pretty sus stuff surrounds the man, and I think that explains a lot of their like in obsessive ranting about homosexuals and all this. I mean, they're really weird about it. I'll post, like, I had this happen the other day, but I posted like a criticism of maybe Trump or Republicans or an argument about some unrelated policy. And they were like, and some Groyper adjacent commentator replied to me and was like, well, are there any arguments that would get you to give up sodomy? And I'm like, you're actually incredibly weird if you just see a gay person existing and speaking about unrelated politics and start thinking about sodomy. Like, that's not normal. I don't, that's not what it's not giving straight male is all I'll say. Like, that's not, when you see me, I'm pretty sure you're straight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're chatting about politics, do you just start like thinking about me having sex with another man?
Well, I don't know. The Clark Kent. No, I mean, it's not something that immediately comes to mind, but you know.
No, that's not how straight people work, right? Like,
Look,
so it's all deeply sus, is all I'll say. He's deeply sus. And I also know personal T. I know people who knew him. We actually grew up or went to college in very close proximity in both time and in the state, and we had mutual friends. And he was once a normal person who went deeply off the rails and fell into this vicious cycle of being extreme and then getting attacked for it and then falling deeper into the arms of these fringe people. And it's sad. I honestly, I pity him. I think he's a reprehensible human being who has some talents of charisma. I mean, for sure, but it decided to use them for genuine evil in a way that I think is shameful.
I just want to say thank you to Hutch, who just rated. I know that I think you spoke, Brad, right, with Hutch recently. Yeah. So thank you so much for the raid, Hutch. Really appreciate it. We are like closing off this conversation, but I'll stick around for a little after discussion. I think that just so you know, Brad, while we were talking, an appeals court, and I don't know why, it could just be an administrative stay. It could be until they consider it, have stayed the ruling of the trade court, and so right now the tariffs are probably still in effect. That is not an indication because we don't know why they stated there's such things as administrative stays. So we don't know what's going on here. I assume it's not an actual merit stay. So just to be clear on that. But yeah, so thank you very much, Hutch Raiders. I want to give you the final word. Who are you looking to, Brad? Who are you reading? Who's your go-to? Or are you just kind of trying to figure it out yourself? And then where can people find you?
So one news source that I really like and can't recommend highly enough is called Tangle. It's by a friend of mine, Isaac Saul, who he puts together on like the big issues that are like dominating politics, like the big beautiful bill. He puts together like a newsletter about these topics, and he'll show you like what smart people on the left are saying. So he'll link a bunch of op-eds and briefly quote from them, and then he'll show you what some somewhat serious people on the right are saying, like just mainstream outlets. And then he'll give you kind of a neutral summation of the facts, and then he'll give you his own opinion. So I find that really invaluable because he has a great team. They do really good research. And then I think the only way to have any sense of what's actually happening is to consume everything. So I watch everything from the Young Turks to the Daily Wire to Fox to CNN to MSNBC. I read Reddit. I monitor Twitter trends. I have like 10 different media outlets that I check every day for story ideas. I am on TikTok an unfortunate amount, but the algorithm feeds me a lot of like crazy left-wing stuff. They're constantly talking about wanting Trump dead and assassinated
Disavow,
in ways that really
completely disavow. I just want to say, and I talked to someone, I want to say, Brad, to underscore that, I talked to someone, unhinged person, who came in my Discord in a call, and he was like, I think the time for violence is now. Like, it's time to be violent. It's time to do these crazy things. And I'm like, we haven't even tried like even the first echelon of protesting. Like, there've been a couple protests that have been big for sure, but they're just kind of testing the waters. Like, we haven't even tried to do more peaceful things, and it would never even be successful. And you would just hand more power over to Trump. It would be a complete and total disaster, even if it were justified.
Everything about
which
it
of
would
course
be
it's
terrible.
not. And so I am seeing some of that. I want to say I am seeing some of that, and it does concern me.
And I can send you some polling on how widespread that sentiment is among Democrats and young progressives. It's scary high, some of the numbers, but I understand. I appreciate you disavowing that, but I'm saying my TikTok algorithm is constantly these people saying, somebody just do it. And we all know what it is.
Yeah. I think I saw a
it's
compilation
really,
of that. Yeah.
It's disturbing, but yeah. And then I follow all sorts of stuff. I think that's the only way to do it. And then for me personally, I host a daily podcast, Brad versus Everyone, on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, where I make fun of woke people and insane left-wing politics, but also criticize Republicans and Trump a fair amount. It's more of an infotainment show, so probably a little bit less in the weeds than some of this conversation, but
Yeah.
I enjoy it. We talk about all sorts of stuff, and if people want to tune in, they can check it out anywhere they get podcasts, Brad versus Everyone, or on my YouTube channel, just Brad Polumbo.
Thank you so much. And the last thing I'll say, the very, very last thing, what do you think about this 8647 thing? It's protected speech, right? I mean, let's not mince words. And you don't think that James
it's
Comey
protected speech.
Yeah.
I talked about this quite a bit. I mean, I think we're in a dangerous time in political violence. So I would say, like, I think people should cool it with that kind of thing, because there is an implication to it that it can sometimes mean,
for sure,
taking people out. But there is a completely plausible and common non-violent reading of it. So the idea that you would prosecute someone for it is totally, totally beyond the pale. It is first, like, for example, Tulsi Gabbard said she wants James Comey brought up on charges.
Wild.
That is, First Amendment protects saying 8647. I don't say it. I don't condone it. I think we should all cool down the rhetoric because scary crap is happening and people are getting violent. And I think James Comey should not have posted that and was reckless. And I think he's kind of a clownish figure at this point. But on free speech grounds, I mean, that is clearly protected expression, as much as I might object to it.
I think he should have thought about it for sure. And I think that oftentimes he's bumbling around, Comey. And I agree with that characterization.
He's giving like MSNBC wine mom these days. And I'm like,
100%. A trillion %.
This dude was once a Republican. And now he's like
an MSNBC
Scarborough lib. It's
100%,
weird.
100%. But the other clownish figure in this whole saga is the Jack Posobiec tweet, where it's literally.
Oh my God! I put that on my show. He is the biggest hypocrite. He literally said 8646.
Wild. And he knows, and he doesn't have any response to it, and there is no response to it. But I do want to say, Brad, it's so shameless. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate the conversation. And yeah, looking forward to talking to you again soon and seeing what you're up to in a few months.
Sounds good. All right.
Bye, later, man.